Good day. My name is Gary Bosgoed. I'm the president and CEO of Bosgoed Project Consultants Limited, and I am a member of the Pepecasis First Nation, and I'm located in Edmonton. I want to acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. Today, I'm going to be talking about capturing construction employment opportunities for First Nations community growth. I've worked with First Nations since 1992 and never considered the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, so I'm thrilled to be able to give this presentation. Today, I will address First Nations capital projects in the context of Sustainable Development Goal number 8. The projects are on or near reserve. They're providing employment and economic growth, but there are challenges and opportunities in that system to provide labor, suppliers, or contractors, and we'll report on the results of our work. There are a number of subsets of Sustainable Development Goal number 8 that are addressed, including per capita economic growth, job creation, decent work, youth employment, and protecting labor rights. This map shows part of the challenge across Canada is all of the treaty areas in Canada, shown here, as well as the numerous traditional territories that I do not have a map for because they are greater than the area of Canada. So there are many, many interests on the land in Canada. But the issues for First Nations are high unemployment, few sustainable economies. I know of a few that are better than others, but many, many struggle. But the paradox is that there's $665 billion worth of projects going on or near First Nations in Canada and in their largely unrecognized traditional territories, but little opportunity provided to the First Nations communities that are near these projects. In Canada, only 51.8% of First Nations people are employed. 53% of First Nations children live in poverty compared to 9.5% in the rest of Canada. 38% of women are employed versus 57% in the rest of Canada. So we consider this an underutilized population, vastly underutilized, yet most projects import workers. So we realized that we believed the capacity was important to bring to projects. What is economic growth for Indigenous communities? Bands do not tax their citizens or their businesses, nor have they any capital projects except for the odd thing that shows up every 20 or so years. Infrastructures are funded by the federal government through Indigenous Services Canada. So economic growth comes from largely band-owned businesses, some entrepreneurs. According to the Royal Commission report produced back in 1995, money needs to move around in a community 7 times for that community's economy to be sustainable. It does not in First Nations communities. The current Canadian Indigenous economy is approximately $30 billion. We would like to see that number go to $100 billion. So even a fraction of the $665 billion worth of projects would contribute to that economy. Indigenous procurement is key to Indigenous economic growth and labor. It depends on many things. First of all, the capacity, obviously, of the community. The good news is that is something we can influence and change and improve. Secondarily, where's the funding coming from? If it is a federal source, there are rules around procurement. But it also could be a development company, a resource company, and hopefully negotiate a procurement approach to engage a community. Over the last few years, with 275 court cases won by Indigenous communities, we have now different rules, the most significant being the social license to operate their businesses in Indigenous traditional territories, and that the communities have a duty to be consulted and to be accommodated when those projects are done. So the emergence of these rules has changed relationships with developers and First Nations over the years. They balance those interests against the need that they have for project certainty. So they do many things. They set aside contracts. They do impact and benefit agreements. They work with non-Indigenous partners. They find a person to lead the company to make it an Indigenous-owned company to attract those contracts. Our answer was the need to plan early, train early, and that's the approach. And we've seen many projects in that 5 or 10% range for Indigenous employees. In our eyes, it wasn't good enough. This is the conversation that we started. Capacity versus need. On the left are what I see as wonderful Indigenous people in Canada, families able and interested in working. On the left is the need of the project. They need labor, they need suppliers, and they need contractors. We believe all of those exist on the left side of this slide, and it's possible to bring these two things together. Right now, there's 1.5 million Indigenous Canadians in Canada, representing 5% of the population. Our projects need workers and suppliers and contractors, and we believe they're there for us. Increasingly as well, First Nations are interested in owning these projects and resources. So that is not addressed in this presentation, but it is the evolution of this issue with First Nations. We started a process years ago and only recently named it Work First. It's simple. Work First goes to the Indigenous community with the project and gives them an opportunity first. They give them an opportunity to do the work first and then go out and find partners, industry capacity, whatever they cannot do, suppliers, contractors, and particularly labor. So this is why it's important to start at the planning phase, hopefully the environmental phase of a project for those that work with projects, as early as possible. In some cases, years are required, and it's worth starting early. I would go into communities personally when I was a contractor and say, who are your best workers? Invariably, an impressive list of qualified people would show up. I've never had a problem finding First Nations workers. So what we do first in the planning phase, we come up with a fake schedule. We try to estimate what the needs of the project are. We look at trades, and we just draft this up and we tell the community, listen, this is what's coming in a few years. And what is your capacity today? And what can we do now to line it up against the project needs? Now, here we are in the design phase. So in many projects, no one's having this conversation at this stage until after this phase, but we are having it throughout the design phase. Not only are we continuing to refine the knowledge of the project, but we, in fact, have changed the content of the design to suit what the community can do. What are they good at? If they're good at carpentry, let's put more wood in the project. And that's worked many, many times to enhance their engagement and their involvement in the project. We ask bidders to tell us what their strategies are and impress upon them that this is a vital part of the project and it is a project that is owned by the First Nation or where they are a rights holder in the project. We get a commitment from them to hire and subcontract First Nations people and companies before we award any project to them. By now, we have more and more frequent and accurate updates on the needs of the project and the capacity that's emerging within the community. During the construction tender phase, we're now getting down to the accurate and maybe final version of the construction team, but we don't stop there. We continue to fill positions with First Nations people to the last day of construction, because it's important that communities recognize that this project may take years and it's never finished filling those positions with First Nations members. The bidders submit their detailed plans. Bidders have subcontractors, 25 or 30 of them. So we make sure that all of them have this information in their hands on band capacity and that they're committed to using it. Sometimes we have to meet with each of them individually to make them understand our capacity and make sure we understand their needs. During construction, the first step is to award the contract. At this point, we've established the hiring program and the construction contracting targets. We have a schedule, which is now a contractor's schedule, not just a planning schedule or designer schedule, but the actual schedule for the project. And now we begin the hiring of First Nations people and make sure they are also the backup people for the roles. And we have monthly reporting and monitoring of not only the volume of work that's being done, but that the commitments are being met. And after the project is built, we celebrate the success of our program. What have the results been of Workforce? First of all, the projects have been great for us to work on. We've worked on over 130 projects applying the Workforce system. 80% of those projects have had 80% First Nations people working on them from the local community. We filled over 1,000 positions with First Nations people and range these days anywhere from 20 to 90% First Nations content on the labor. Under suppliers, we have had all sorts of negotiated and sole sourced contracts for everything that's listed here: equipment, aggregate, food, shelter, and many other things. On the contracting side, it's the high risk side, it's the high reward side. And again, different ways of arriving at a competitive price with a First Nations contractor. And increasingly, First Nations are setting up construction companies. What have we learned? Well, we'll step into the confessional and share this with you. We, first of all, know that this is cheaper. We also know that it's important to understand dispute resolution with workers that have not been working together before. We also recommend Indigenous awareness training, better resumes. Let's set up a database. We also want people to know that there's no premium here, that these workers come from down the road, across the street, and are readily available when we need them. The First Nation community itself must believe that this is possible, that over time they can engage larger and larger teams on projects. As far as economic growth goes, we're seeing more and more companies formed by First Nations. It might be an individual who has come to me and said, Gary, I want to buy a backhoe. What do you think? So I helped him find a backhoe, and now he actually runs a fleet of excavation equipment. That's economic growth. The band's getting into construction, selling their aggregate, building trailers to accommodate workers. That's all economic growth, and it's all there for them on capital projects. This is a story of one person addressing decent jobs and economic growth in Indigenous communities in Canada. Imagine what we can achieve if we work together. Thank you.